questioning is perhaps the greatest gift we have as human beings.
Science is more than a body of knowledge. It's a way of thinking.
It's a way of thinking that teaches us to question everything we think we know.
Science came about by developing techniques, methodologies for gaining reliable knowledge about the world.
We have at our fingertips the technologies that were only possible for the largest governments and corporations 20 years ago as an individual today.
If the human civilization continued at anything remotely like the current pace of technology advancement for 1 million years, where would we be? I think we're either extinct or on a lot of planets.
The good thing about science is that it's true whether or not you believe in it.
We hold the scientific method in high regard because it works. If it stopped working, we throw it out.
Discover the past.
Create the future.
This is the Here and How podcast.
Welcome to the Here and How podcast, where every week we dive deep into big ideas to explore the past and create a brighter future. This is episode 4, Is the Earth Flat? I'm Stephen Woodford, also known as Rationality Rules, and with me is the talented Thomas Westbrook, also known as Holy Kool-Aid, and the renowned Rachel Oates. Say hi, guys.
Hi, guys.
Hello, guys.
I was waiting for one of you to do that. The last time I introduced you, I was waiting for a hello, guys. So, first question for you both. Is the Earth flat?
Yes. Oh.
Okay, we've got a yes from Rachel.
Can I change my
answer? I
answer?
was going to go with more of like a trapezoidal shape.
That's a good one.
So far we have me, who will argue that it's a sphere. Rachel arguing that it's flat, and what did you just say you're going to argue for, Thomas?
Well, okay, I'm a little confused on this because you have a circle is 2-dimensional and a sphere is 3-dimensional.
Yes.
If a trapezoid is or trapezoid, I don't know. If it's 2D, what is the cubic version of that?
A quadzoid.
Wait, wasn't there a word where you can just like add it onto the end of a shape and it means it's like 3D?
I didn't know there was. If that's the
is.
case, I'm going to have a new favourite suffix.
I might be wrong, but I'm probably wrong.
But in essence, you're going to argue for a cube. Is that right? A cube Earth, Thomas.
Ooh, that would be an interesting one.
Fair enough.
Yeah, it would be good.
Yeah.
A slanted cube.
You mean a pyramid?
Really slanted to the point that it's a sphere, right? Okay, so
I will play the devil's advocate somewhat throughout this episode.
Absolutely should. And that's actually the point of this episode. It's going to get a lot across. So let's be real here. We all do not think the Earth is flat. We think it's a sphere. Is that right? I don't want to put words in your mouths, but is that good?
I would go so far as to say that we know that the Earth is a sphere.
Okay. That's
as in so much as we can know anything.
I'll tell you what, mate. You're very arrogant, and people are going to tell you that for that.
I'm quite sure, but we could be in a simulation.
And outside of the simulation, it is actually flat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Outside the realm of philosophy, assuming that you can know things, it's pretty safe to say that the Earth is an oblate spheroid.
Yeah, because you said it wrong, I'm going to say it wrong now. But yeah, oblate spheroid.
Wait, what does that mean?
That's basically the correct term for it.
Okay.
Oblate, but just means it's not perfect. It's got pressure from the north and south pole, essentially, at least in this context.
Well, because it's spinning, it tends to bulge.
Yeah, if you say the Earth is round, someone will.
Wait, so when someone says that they're curvy, the question I've always had is it concave or convex?
You can just call them oblate from now.
Oblate.
Just go with that. Yes.
Imperfect, bulging.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't describe a lovely lady as bulging unless I wanted to be slapped, but that works. So here's the more interesting question. Mm-hmm. We all I would say that the Earth's a sphere. Mm-hmm. So would Rachel. Thomas would claim arrogantly to know it for sure. Mm-hmm. So here's the more interesting question. How do you know that?
Because it says so in all of the books, and I take everything that I read at face value.
Excellent.
It's
so that's
what they want us to say.
I mean, it's not just one piece of evidence, and I think we're going to go through them. But I've done quite a bit of traveling, and I've been in a lot of time zones, communicating with people in different time zones. I've traveled around the world. I've known people who've been to Antarctica. I have one of my friend's dads was an astronaut on the ISS.
Oh.
You know, there's tons and tons of pictures. There's live footage. You know, all the way from launch up until, you know, a satellite is in space. There's private enterprises that work on this. It's not just governments. There's multiple governments that have launched spacecrafts up into space. Everything that we have on Earth revolves around like every single thing that we use technologically relies on satellites that are bouncing signals off of each other, that are allowing us to have the internet and to have GPS. And, you know, there's way too much evidence for me to think that, you know, that the whole flat Earth nonsense is anything but a conspiracy theory.
Okay, so jump in on the flat Earth nonsense, but I'll do that just after what you want to say there. So jump in, Rachel.
Oh, I was going to say, so what you're trying to say is that everything revolves around the Earth being a revolving round ball.
That is Thomas's claim for sure. I'm gonna just throw it all on you tonight, Thomas. So bringing up the flat Earth, the purpose of this conversation is essentially to illustrate how people have used the scientific method to arrive at a conclusion, and we've chosen that topic because it's potent in the sense that there's a lot of people, I say a lot of people, a small amount of Americans mainly, sorry Thomas, who have been stating that there is a conspiracy that the Earth is a sphere when really it's flat, and a lot of them reference the Bible, etc., which you can get a reading off that description depending on how you read it. But that's the reason why this is the topic we've chosen to illustrate knowledge, etc. So a good place to start would be with, how do you prove anything, and what does prove mean?
Well, I think part of it goes back to episode 1, how we were talking about the scientific method and how it's evolved and how we've, you know, developed better and better tools and better methods. You know, we've come up with peer review and double-blind tests and placebo testing and stuff. And so, like, there's different ways that we can become more and more sure about something. So, like, when I said at the very beginning of the episode that I know that the Earth is spherical in as much as we can know anything. Yeah, we could all be living in some simulation. We could all be hooked up to the Matrix, you know, aside from, you know, the cogito ergo sum, like I think therefore I am. We can't technically know something 100% for sure besides we exist. But you get into this useless realm of, you know, philosophical thinking that's not practical. Yeah, it's fun to think about, you know, there's deep ramifications that might come about through thinking that way, but you have to come down to, like, how can we test it empirically? How can we test it in order to have any kind of practical results? And whenever you have a particular theory, like, is the Earth round, you start asking, is it falsifiable? How would we prove this wrong? And then you go about performing those tests, and you do as many tests as you can think of. And if every single test that you perform actually confirms or doesn't disprove it, then your theory is still holding up under scrutiny. And then if you have pieces of evidence that actually confirm it, like photographic evidence, then you start to build a really strong case for, you know, the Earth being a sphere, or for any other theory being validated.
Yeah, great points there, and the emphasis on not being able to know anything with 100% certainty, apart from, of course, I think, therefore I am, perhaps. That's the point, at least for now, I want to absolutely nail down. I have a multitude of reasons, for example, to think that my floor is solid, that I'm not going to be able to fall through it, but I don't know it 100% because that requires a level of proof, if you will, that's just not attainable. But when it comes to conspiracy theorists, a lot of them, they want that kind of proof, whereas they won't ask for that in other areas. But what we can present is strong evidence. Now, you mentioned about satellites, etc., and we can even tap into gravity. But those require an understanding of their principles. And so to somebody who doesn't necessarily, to somebody that's essentially scientifically illiterate, how would you demonstrate that the Earth is a sphere? How would you show them that it's not flat? Because the starting point is that we're born and we experience the world around us, and we experience it as it's flat, generally, unless you're really paying attention. So the burden of proof is on those who are claiming that it's a sphere. So how would you go around it? If I came up to you and I didn't know it was round.
I think the first thing to look at that kind of everyone can understand is looking at where the sun rises and where the sun sets, and looking at like the length of the days and things like that. And if you take measurements of that from all over the world, I know like flat earthers try and come up with this idea of like the Earth is kind of like the sun is kind of like rotating in a circle around us or something, above us or something like that. But when you really take all the kind of data into account, the simplest explanation is that the Earth is round and we are orbiting the sun and everything. You know?
Well, I think just the fact that we have a horizon, the Earth doesn't get dimmer as it gets further away. I mean, the sun doesn't get dimmer as it gets further away until it's just, not light enough. It drops below a certain point. If you have someone standing at the base of a mountain and someone standing at the top of it, the sunset time is going to be different. One of the most blatant examples of this is if you go to Dubai, the tallest building in the world, the Burj Khalifa, actually has different timetables for Ramadan, because during Ramadan, the Muslim holy month, they fast from sunrise until sunset. And so they have about a 2-minute difference between when the sun sets at the very top of the building versus when it sets at the floor, so that people in the restaurant know when they can eat.
Yeah,
and you wouldn't have that. You wouldn't have that if the Earth was flat, because it would just be the sun just kind of slowly became dimmer, and it'd be this very gradual gradient dimming into the distance rather than it dropped below a horizon.
So yeah, you both tapped into two really, I mean, it is two different things there, but they're both interesting. And I think one of the point I want to get across is if you have two models, one of them is the spherical model and one of them is the flat. The observation that the sun rises and it goes down, that works on both models, and so you can use it for evidence of both, really, unless you get into the details, and you're right, that's where it starts to break down. But the observation that you can travel up in a building and see the sun, whereas you couldn't see it when you were at the bottom, that is very strong evidence for a spherical Earth. And it's the same principle that's used for when people are viewing ships, particularly, and other objects, which appear to sink into the water. So when you just go to the beach and you look, but you can bring them back into view by simply standing on a ladder or just getting a couple of feet higher. About 10 feet higher is normally good, and it brings them back up. That observation, that objective, verifiable test, because it's, in essence, that's rudimentary science, that right there absolutely demonstrates a fact, a bit of evidence that works with a spherical model, but doesn't work with a flat Earth model, for example, or a cube model. And because of that, that, in my opinion, is strong evidence. So there's several other ways, of course, that we can go around demonstrating with just rudimentary techniques that the Earth is a sphere. Do you guys know any others? Is there any others that you would use? Because I think that's really strong what you've both just said about the different vantage points allowing you to see different amounts of certain objects.
Well, I think one thing to point out is it is kind of difficult to test visually in terms of like if you launch something up into space. There's a guy who he was trying to launch himself up in a rocket, but the altitudes that he was going for were like, I think it was like less than or maybe comparable to what you would expect to get just in an airplane. And those altitudes, like, people don't realize just how stupidly big the Earth is. Yep. You know, where you can zoom way, 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 way out and go all the way up like in an airplane or something, or go up in a weather balloon, and you're barely scratching the surface of, you know, being able to see, you know, the entirety of the Earth, or, you know, to us, the Earth feels flat because it's so huge. If you look at any sphere, as it gets bigger, its surface is going to be flatter. or it's going to appear flatter. So like a ping pong ball is more round than a basketball in terms of like if you're standing on the surface of it and you're really, really small, then, you know, it's going to appear much, much rounder.
Have you seen that Vsauce video about like how flat the Earth is in terms of like even the tallest mountains and buildings don't really make any like dents on it in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
So like if you...
It's smoother than a billiard ball.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point to raise up. That really illustrates Thomas's point about how big it is.
Yeah.
The
it's
distance
like if you're holding it, you could barely feel it being wet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's one of the factors. It's very easy to think the Earth is a lot smaller than what it is, and it really is massive. And that's why the fact that we can actually see a 2-minute delay with the sun setting by going up in a building, essentially, with the height, or we can see it when a ship's in the distance and you just go up higher and you see it. This works with or without binoculars. Some flat earthers have said, if you just zoom in further, you can see it. All I can say to those people is go do it yourself and you'll realize that's not true. It's just, it gets them clickbait. So yeah, that's a really good point about it being big. One of the biggest observations that was made by early astronomers, it was certainly made by Thales and people like Anaximander, but I think this observation probably dates back really quite far. If you look at all of the celestial bodies, so the moon, other planets, we've known about them for thousands of years, the sun and stars, all of them are round.
Yeah.
I say round rather than spheroid because that's how they look. They look round. They're all round. So you can infer from that it's at least likely that whatever you're on is round. So going back to the proof thing, does that prove that the Earth is a sphere? No, of course it doesn't. It's just a little bit of evidence which, when you put it in conjunction with other scientific findings and verifiable objective findings, such as the fact that the sun seems to set 2 minutes later if you're just higher up, you're starting to build, and not at this point, but you're starting to build an overwhelming amount of evidence, and that's essentially the pathway to knowledge when it comes to science, essentially.
Well, not just that, but like we don't just look up and see, oh, hey, Jupiter looks round, because it's like, okay, well, what if Jupiter's like it's a pancake and it's just facing us, right? But we can see it as it rotates.
Yeah.
We can see, all of the different, weather, storms and phenomenons that are happening. We can see moons that are orbiting around it, multiple moons. And you can do this as an amateur astronomer. You don't have to be, some professional person who has access to Hubble or something. You can just get a high grade telescope and point it up and observe this stuff yourself. Yeah. And so then to then look up at our moon and be like, oh, hey, like this thing looks really similar to those things and it's flying around us. And, you can see the International Space Station. You can observe it, and you can observe it. I think Destin from Smarter Every Day took a series of high-speed photographs during the solar eclipse that just happened here in the U.S. of the International Space Station flying across the sun right as the eclipse was happening, and he caught it all on photograph. And so like it's not like there's just some big conspiracy that it's and flat earthers would say, oh, maybe it's a plane, or maybe it's some super fast aircraft that the US has. But it's like, well, how does gravity work for those moons that are flying around in orbit? Yeah. What's happening is they're constantly falling towards the object, but they're moving so fast that they're basically they stay in orbit because their movement, their velocity is so fast that they are constantly falling. They're constantly in a state of falling, but they're falling as they're moving sideways, and so they wind up in orbit. And so if we understand how all of this works, and we understand the math behind it, and we understand the math behind it enough to actually test all of this and to send these spacecrafts up into space and to put people on the moon and to land probes on comets and to film this stuff and to take pictures of it, then I think it's a little nuts to assume that somehow all of this works for those planets, but somehow it's different for ours.
Yeah. I guess
do you want to add in? Yeah.
I was going to say, I guess this is kind of like a question I have, is that if we can see other planets around, then what makes ours so special? Why do people think ours is the different one, the special one?
Mm.
You know?
I think what you're saying there, and I agree. Once certain observations are made, like that's a great one with the all other celestial bodies being round. Once that happens, especially when we add in what you just said, Thomas, where we and astronomers for thousands of years have been able to see planets at slightly different angles. So, like, and because of that, they have been able to say and hypothesize that they are at least round if we're not. At that point, the burden of proof is shifting, in the sense of then they need to claim, or the person that sees that observation and wants to claim, no, we are special, well, then they're starting to acquire a burden of proof themselves. Now, it's very easy to be ad hoc as well and just say, well, no, they're just flat. Okay, you can see that it's turning. Well, that's an illusion caused by its atmosphere or something. All of these ad hoc things. But every time anything like that's mentioned, they acquire a burden of proof. They are making assertions. And what you'll find is, in the realm of conspiracy theorists, they don't provide evidence for those facts as they present them. So, yeah, so far what we have is all other celestial bodies around. Objects appear to sink into the horizon, and you can bring them back into view by going up further. What other methods can you use? What other sources of evidence indicate that the Earth is a sphere?
Well, I think one of them is if you take a time lapse from the North Pole and from the South Pole, then you'll see the stars are basically there. It appears like they're going in a circle around the Earth, but at the North Pole and at the South Pole, they're going in different directions.
Yes, that is a good observation. And to add on top of that, and this is one that was made ages ago, it may have been attributed to 500 BC Thales, but certainly his apprentice Anaximander definitely made this observation, and that is that some star constellations which are visible in the south are never visible in the north, and vice versa. So that fits very well. Again, it's a compelling bit of evidence that's verifiable. It's objective, and it fits the model of the Earth being round or a sphere. It does not fit so well the model of it being flat. But again, to talk in the colloquial languages, it doesn't prove anything and it doesn't disprove anything. It's just that's where that evidence lies. It points that those facts point towards a different conclusion. And in science, that's essentially how everything works. Take, for example, the theory of evolution. The reason why it's revered as it is because a stupid amount of evidence from multiple fields of study are all of it works according to that theory and doesn't work, say, according to creationism or whatever other hypotheses have been proposed. And that's basically what we have with the Earth being round. So that's a great add there with the star constellations and the way that they spin. Another one, which is, I find this to be really compelling, and that is that during a lunar eclipse, which is when the Earth goes in between the moon and the sun, what you see, the shadows that are cast on the moon are always convex. To me, that's really powerful evidence that we're on a spherical or a round celestial body. To me, that's really, really strong evidence. But what do you guys make of that one? Do you, like myself, see that as particularly compelling, or is it the same as the others, really?
Well, no, I think that's a good one because that's something that like everyone can see for themselves with their eyes. You know what I mean? You can't argue that, oh, it's just numbers or, oh, you photoshopped whatever. That's like an actual thing that people can see. And like, imagine if the world was flat, like what sort of shape would we expect to see? It's something that you can't really explain away, which I think is the important thing.
I think one thing to point out is that I don't find that particularly convincing, to play the devil's advocate here, because if the Earth is flat but it's a circle, like circle shaped, and if the sun went under the Earth, and the moon was over it, then it would still project a shadow like that.
But you would be able to see the sun still in that case. You'd be able to see it setting while casting a shadow.
Where that doesn't make sense is that most of these flat Earth models don't have the sun going underneath the Earth. They have the sun kind of orbiting in a circle around the flat Earth. And so for the moon to, for that to happen to the moon, it doesn't really fit. Like, so they might be able to say, oh, hey, the Earth is flat and the sun, orbits above like this, and this explains for that. But then they have to take that same model and apply it to every other piece of evidence. And if they have to change their model to fit various pieces of evidence, and they contradict each other, then you start to have a theory that's falling apart.
Yeah. That's a great point. You can easily rationalize a flat Earth model that accounts for certain things, but the point that you just raised is absolutely brilliant. Does that particular model also account for other evidence? Because if they are switching that model, well, that's not a move that's open to you. You can't do that. That's ridiculous. It's profoundly anti-scientific. And you almost have to be doing that unconsciously. Otherwise, you've got serious cognitive dissonance going on. But yeah, it is good to play devil's advocate with these pieces of evidence, because then you're kind of putting yourself into the mind of somebody that's skeptical in that sense. And the reason why these evidences are particularly strong is, as you just said, Rachel, they're observable just to us. So the problem is that when you need to use gravity, or you need to talk about satellites or evidence along those lines, it, in the mind of a conspiracy theorist, from my experience, and I've spoken with many, anything that you can't see and grasp yourself, they suspect at least, foul play. And that's a different conversation, because they somehow think that everybody's involved and there's no faults coming out. They're somehow getting the same statements from different competing ideologies in many senses, when that's just not the case. But that's why these evidences are particularly strong. You can see them.
Yeah, the thing is, like, in a weird way, I kind of respect some flat earthers in that they don't just want to accept what they've been told. They want to find their own evidence. They want to question things. Like, I get that. It's just, you can't think just because the way I'm trying to put this is, like, just because you distrust what you've been told, it doesn't automatically make it incorrect.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point, by the way. I have the same respect for it. I really do respect the open-mindedness, etc. But there's a point where it gets too bad, and that's when you get into everyone's in on something. Richard Dawkins famously said, by all means have an open mind, but don't be so open-minded that your brain falls out. And finding that balance is quite hard. One of the first things I found surprising was when I was studying the Flat Earth conspiracy, for one of the videos on my channel, I originally asked myself, how would I prove it to somebody that's scientifically illiterate or doesn't understand gravity, etc. And until I did a bit of research and started thinking about it, I didn't have an answer on me. Now, I'm not a stupid person. Well, some people would say I am. But the point being is that it wasn't something I had thought about. And I found that was exactly the case with a lot of people that I spoke to, friends and family. I'd say to them, I've just got a question for you. Don't worry, I'm not in this category, but prove to me that the Earth is a sphere. And you'll be surprised by how many very smart people can't do it. Now,
so
the problems I'm actually seeing... Yeah, no, you go on. I'll jump on afterwards.
Okay, thanks. I was just going to say, when I was making a video on my channel called, like, Why Are There So Many Flat Earthers? I found this great article about this concept of outsider physicists. And they're people who sometimes they have actual physics qualifications, sometimes they don't. But they're the kind of people who want to go out and try things for themselves. They don't just want to accept what they've read in books. And so it's kind of, people doing backyard experiments and people who want to try and find proof for stuff that's already been, established. And I kind of do respect them for that. But also, that's how you end up with flat earthers, because they there's a point where I don't think you should question just for the sake of questioning.
Yeah, like it gets to a point where there's no point.
Yeah.
It reminds me of vaccines, actually. Vaccines causing
Yeah.
autism.
Mhm.
After so much time,
Mhm.
this just becomes tiresome.
Yeah.
And you end up with situations where pseudoscience gets involved and people misrepresenting things. Creationism's a great idea, completely misrepresents evolution.
Mhm.
And this debate's over. It's just because of presentation and will, it doesn't look like it, and it doesn't feel like it to many people.
Well, and my question is, for these people who are going out and testing it, I have absolutely no issue with someone going out and trying to test and trying to see, like, what is the evidence for this and trying to figure it out on their own. But if they're going to start going and, touting this as, oh, I debunked this entire theory, are they aware of all of the tests and all of the pieces of evidence that they're going up against? Because in order for them to throw out a theory like, the Earth is round, they have to be aware of all of the evidence in favor of a spherical Earth. And then they have to not only debunk those pieces of evidence, but they have to come up with a better explanation that fits all of them. And then, if they have all these pieces of evidence that fit an alternate theory, it's like, as long as neither one has been disproven and they have a perfect, amount of evidence for both, then you still have two competing theories. You don't have one that's displaced another. You would have to disprove the first one. And as far as I'm aware, they don't have one solid theory that really accounts for everything. A lot of times they're not aware of all the tests that have been done. They're not aware of all, and they have to appeal to conspiracy. They have to appeal to everyone in the scientific community is trying to lie to you. They're trying to tell you that gravity works a particular way that it doesn't.
Yeah.
And it's almost always the people who buy into this stuff. Like, I did a video on David Avocado Wolf, and this type of mindset, it's not just that, oh, the moon landing was fake, or, NASA is lying to us about the Earth being round. Almost always they have to couple it with so many other conspiracies, like gravity doesn't work that way, and if we would just all float off the Earth if we didn't have salt in our diet, and the Earth is exuding Earth energy, and and it's all of this crazy nonsense to try to account for this one conspiracy. And in order for this one conspiracy to be true, there has to be a million other conspiracies that all these scientists are in league, even though there's like hundreds of journals on the master journals list that are all run by, multiple editors, multiple scientists, multiple people. There's thousands and thousands and millions of scientists around the world working at universities. Like, I don't think they realize the scale of this for it to be a giant conspiracy. And if you've ever been a part of that community, if you've ever worked in academia, if you've ever, actually encountered and talked with these scientists, you start to realize that there actually are methods in place to try to find the most reliable theories that actually account for as many things as possible, and to improve those theories. And we've been working on this for hundreds and hundreds of years, discounting things that didn't work and keeping things that do. And so for them to just assume that the last several hundred years of scientific inquiry and thousands of institutions around the world and hundreds of governments around the world are all just trying to throw the wool over our eyes, like, two people can keep a secret if one of them is dead, and yet you expect the entire scientific community to somehow be behind this. It's ludicrous.
That is a really excellent point. And oh, sorry, do you wanna?
No, you go. I will add on top.
Okay. Oh god, wait, my brain's gone dead. What was I gonna say?
Shall I run and then you jump on?
It's Steve using his reptilian powers to try to prevent you from chiming in. He's secretly a flat earther. He knows the truth. He's woke.
I'm in on the conspiracy.
Wait, give me a second. I feel like I had a good point.
Yeah, sure.
We can just cut this bit out.
Nah, we'll keep it. We're going to let people know. I'll quickly just mention...
You go ahead.
Put some full stops on it, and then you just come in afterwards. And that is what you were saying about them being people going out and being scientists. There's nothing wrong with that. But as Potholer54 has said, there's a difference between a scientist and an armchair scientist. An armchair scientist just basically doesn't do these tests, doesn't submit it for peer review, it's just he makes conclusions based on just hypothesizing certain things and ad hocing answers to certain facts or observations, and that doesn't work. The second point you made about when a new theory comes in, it supersedes, or I think the word you used was it displaces. It doesn't. A lot of people get this idea that you have a theory that's built on a load of evidence, and then when a new theory comes along and it's better, all of that evidence is now rejected. It's not. It's just that theory is not the one that we use to describe it, because the fact is that the evidence fits both, but it fits that one better, and that's why it's superseded. And the example that's best to give that across again is with Newton. The evidence that we had, and we had a lot of evidence, we do have a lot of evidence for gravity, it fit Newton's hypotheses, his theories, and that's why it was dominant. When Einstein came along, none of the evidence all of a sudden, none of the observations, the facts, stopped. It's just he could account for them better, and that's why it superseded.
He refined it.
Yeah, well, essentially, yeah, you can see it that way, or you can see it as a replacement, but what the most important thing is that the facts themselves, the evidence themselves, the observation, none of that changed. That's still the case. It just does a better job at explaining them.
Newtonian gravity still works. If you're an engineer and you're designing something, you can do a pretty damn good job with Newtonian gravity, unless you're, if you have to take into account something that's like subatomic, you're working at, the CERN super collider or something. Yeah, you might have to go a little deeper, but it's not like Newton's observations were wrong.
No, exactly. Exactly on that case.
So I think this kind of links me back to a similar problem I was going to talk about that a lot of flat earthers have, and that a lot of creationists have, and things like that. And it's that when they try and question these big theories, they don't do it by first looking at all the evidence that's already there and then trying to disprove it or add to it. They're like, okay, we're going to discount everything that's already happened. We're going to ignore it and just try and start from scratch to find our own evidence. And it's a thing that Ken Ham is really, really notorious for in terms of creationism, because he's just like, oh, forget all that Darwin stuff. We'll just start at the Bible and work from there. And you get other people who are like, are you really going to try and tell me that your grandmother was a chimpanzee? Because they don't understand what evolution is, and they don't understand the evidence we have for it, and the observations we have for it, and the data we have for it, and so on so far. And it's the same with flat earthers. A lot of them don't understand the process we went through to get to the point we are today, to understand that, the earth is a sphere, and they don't understand necessarily what the processes have been. They don't understand what the observations are, and so on. And so I think that's a big problem with these, outsider physicists and armchair scientists, is they just kind of discount everything that's already there and try and start, several steps back from where they could be. And I think that's what you end up with.
Oftentimes, these conspiracy theorists, they start with a mindset that's basically just a distrust of authority. Yeah. Which I don't really have a problem with that, because, they'll bring up oh, look, the government lies about things all the time. And, look at the Bay of Pigs or the Iran-Contra scandal, or look at, the CIA's involvement in, Pinochet in Chile, coming to power and stuff like that. And so they'll bring up all these things to say the government, doesn't have your best interest in mind. It's all, selfish, evil, horrible people or whatever. And so my response to that would be yeah, on the one hand, governments do things that are not in the best interest of the people. They do things in the best interest of the people in power. If you've ever read The Dictator's Handbook, it makes a really solid case for that. But at the same time, just because someone in authority, or just because there's, particular organizations or hierarchies that are trying to discover knowledge and trying to establish an understanding of this stuff, doesn't mean that the conclusions that they come to are inherently false or are inherently wrong, and it's very, very difficult when you're talking about scientific knowledge to create any kind of conspiracy when it's not just American scientists who are putting this stuff forth. It's Russian scientists during the Cold War who are simultaneously coming to the same conclusions. It's Chinese scientists and Japanese scientists and Indian scientists. And like, our countries aren't always on the best of terms with each other. It's, you know, sometimes they're allies, sometimes they're not. And so for everyone all around the world to be coming to the same conclusions, for science to be working the same for me as it is for, you know, someone in South Africa, that tells me really strongly that this can't be just some conspiracy. And you have to completely just suspend all disbelief and just assume that everyone is out to get you and there's some grand conspiracy, some mastermind. And I see how incompetent governments are, and I find it extremely unbelievable to think that there's some huge, you know, cover up for something like this. Like, what's the motive behind it? Why would they?
That is exactly
They're not competent
what I was
enough
say.
either. Yeah, the competency. Like, you expect people with that position to be that competent, to be that unified. I mean, really.
But also,
but something
like,
that you
what is the motive for trying to hide the fact that the Earth is flat? Like, why would anyone want to hide that? It just doesn't make sense to me.
some people, I've asked that question before. Some people have said, oh, they're trying to hide that the Earth is flat because if you knew it was flat, then you would all of a sudden become a Christian and start believing in the Bible. And I know that most Christians don't buy into that nonsense, but there is...
Most Christians aren't flat earthers, though.
They're not, exactly. That's the point. But and I totally buy that. Another one, creationists like to make out that most Christians believe in creation as told in Genesis, but that's not the case. Most Christians accept evolution. They certainly accept microevolution, as they call it, and most Christians in general accept evolution outright. They square that circle somehow. I personally don't know how, but I do know how, but I don't think it works. But a point that you made, and this is actually something I do when I discuss conspiracies with anyone, and it's worked very well for me. So a bit of advice kind of thing. The conspiracies happen, of course they happen, and so they can't be dismissed out of hand immediately. But the bigger the claim, the more evidence is required, of course. And when you're going against the idea that the Earth is a sphere, that's a big burden you're taking on with the context of your surrounding and all the knowledge that we know. But one of the first things I ask people is, do you believe in other conspiracies? And depending on what conspiracies they buy into, will tell you about their mindset. So if somebody did have a conversation about the flat Earth, and I asked them, do you believe 9/11 was a conspiracy? Of course. And I'm not conflating the two. I think, of course, it's more likely that 9/11 conspiracies are true than the Earth being flat. Though I think both of them, I've even done a video on 9/11, I don't think that's the case. But then I asked them... thanks. I asked them about... That's right. Yeah, just sell my product, please. Then you can ask them, I have asked them, the pyramids, how did they get there? And a lot of the time they will say aliens, or they will say there was some kind of intervention, and you can build the profile once you know the...
That's so freaking dumb. I know I talked about that in the last episode, but like, a pyramid is the most simple structure.
It's not, though.
No, seriously,
it's not.
Watch the
It's
Netflix
not.
documentary, The Pyramid Code. It's so ridiculous. It's brilliant.
I don't buy that.
It's a cluster of material. It's, I mean,
okay. Let me play devil's advocate with you.
Just to compare it to, say, like, you know, a cathedral or something, you know, or some, you know, elaborate flying buttresses or something. Like, a pyramid is just, it's a stack of rocks.
I think the impressive thing is kind of like the intricate tunnel systems inside, and, you know, a lot of the kind of big caverns, and sometimes they had sort of secret passages and things like that, and sort of secret rooms, and we've definitely not discovered everything yet. So I think it's kind of the complexity there that makes it a little bit, like, kind of unbelievable. Yeah, sorry, go on.
But it's tunnels. You don't need alien technology to create tunnels of blocks.
They did things which were not done for thousands of years afterwards, and they are impressive. At least I would hold that position. They moved hunks of rock that we still don't really know how they did it. There's a guy who figured out how to move massive amounts of stone recently with a stick. Very, very clever.
Is this the guy who built Stonehenge in his back garden?
Yes, it is. Yeah. So he built a. I don't know if it was Stonehenge or a smaller version,
yeah.
but he moved tremendous amounts of weight by just using a very simple technique with a stick. Genius. But we didn't know that, and we haven't known that for ages. That if they used that, which is probable, we didn't know about it for a very long time. It's lost information in that sense.
Or just thousands and thousands of workers.
Yes, but I mean, you only have so many hands that can get hold of a rock. I mean, I guess you could say pulling it, and then it's lifted up into certain positions. When I look at the pyramids,
ropes and ramps,
a lot of them with the weight, whatnot, and if you actually look at the geometry of it, some of it is really impressive. As you said before, it's not better than what we have now, but it really is super advanced. Now, the reason I think that's the case is because, one, that's what their lives were about. That's their religion. That's their purpose. They need to know this stuff according to what their philosophies were. But two is that they achieved things that weren't achieved for thousands of years later, and people do look at what they've done and they do recognize that the geometry is very impressive. The locations and how it lines up with certain aspects of astronomy is really impressive. I think mocking it, if you mock it, you strengthen the conspiracy theorists.
I think one thing to point out, though, is that it wasn't the only wonder. Yeah, it was one of the earliest, but if not the earliest, but you have the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, and the Temple at Ephesus, and the White House at Alexandria, and stuff that were all incredible feats of architecture that they're not really around anymore. They all got destroyed through, earthquakes or invaders or whatever.
Yeah.
And now there's only a column or something that's still standing.
Yeah, we're very lucky to have that, as you were saying, because it's also in an area.
A pyramid is just extremely durable because it's, it has a really wide base, and, it can withstand all kinds of things. And, you don't exactly have hurricanes or tornadoes or giant floods or anything in Egypt that would... Or I think the Nile might flood, but I don't know if it gets close enough to the pyramids, or if it would
there's
be able to erode it that fast.
Some evidence of erosion around the Sphinx, I think. Or
I've heard about that.
Yeah, but I don't think it was ever enough to damage the actual pyramids themselves.
But you're not getting a tsunami.
No.
You're not getting
you're not, and that's why
giant earthquakes. It's not right on a fault line.
I think if you look at it and you say it's just a lump of stone, versus looking at it and saying it's an enormous amount of work to do that. It's so big and it's so impressive that it must have taken a very long time, and the techniques that they used either have been lost to history or it was just incredible work. That in itself, especially along with the fact that the geometry and the fact that it aligns up with certain astrological principles, is, I think that how could you not say that's impressive? It's very impressive. A lot of the things that happen is, if somebody was to come up to you about flat Earth and immediately say, no, you're an idiot and it's not like that, they feel validated in the conspiracy. And I think that happens often in other areas. So someone says
I'm not saying that it's not an impressive piece of architecture, and I'm not saying that it didn't require a lot of work. But I'm saying you compare that to something like the Colosseum or the Parthenon or something, and just the sheer amount of intricacies with other pieces of architecture that, some of them have massive columns. Some of them are lined up with the winter solstice, or with, various astronomical bodies or something at different times of year or something. They'll have, it's not like this is uncommon. It's not like there aren't people who have been architects going back thousands of years, or people who have been building stuff. And so to me, I see the pyramids and I'm like, yes, it is. It's a lot of really heavy hunks of rock, but it's still a pile of rocks that you can easily build. Not easily, but you can build ramps and you can use ropes. And if you have a massive slave labor, or not slaves, but population that's all working towards it, then anything is possible. To say that this requires some type of alien technology, to me is it's absolutely ludicrous. It's not like it's that hard to figure out how to build something like this.
No, I think the context of the time matters. That's the main thing. So as you said, it's not just a lump of rock, heavy rock. It's a lump of heavy rock that
Lots of
rocks. Its geometry is impressive. The rocks have somehow been moved very high up. Like you said, there's really good reasons for it. It's just, to somebody that doesn't know those reasons, these things are quite compelling, and it aligns up very well with certain celestial bodies. When you take that into fact, and more specifically the time zone, the context of when it was built, and compared to what we were finding everywhere else in the world, it is very impressive. So you can go, oh, there's aliens, and of course that's not the case. There's not evidence for that, but there's strong evidence to say that they really knew things that seem to have been lost afterwards. And that you could say, well, no, it's in an area where there's not much weather, because that's a great point that you raised, and that's largely why we still have the pyramids, or it wasn't just destroyed by another culture coming in, as we see.
Do you know how old the Mayan pyramids are, or Aztec?
I know I know one of them, but how old? What ones are you referring to?
I think there are ones in India as well. I don't have the information right here, but because I'm curious to see, the time difference. One thing to point out is that, like, humanity, we evolved out of Africa.
Yes.
So it's not unlikely that the earliest civilizations, the largest civilizations, it makes sense that they would form in Africa. Evolutionarily, we're not really any different than the Egyptians at that time. It's not like our brains have grown since then. It's not like we've really changed genetically since then. It's a very, very short time frame. It's a few thousand years.
But a lot of it is culture.
So
yeah, it's all about education and culture, right? What information we're exposed to.
If they were able to form societies and communities and civilizations in that area first, yeah, of course, that's where you would first expect something like that to rise up.
Yes. If the Mayans and the other places that you were saying, if they maneuvered the same amount of weight or similar types of weight, if their geometry is as elegant, and if their positioning is also as impressive, or they have other things of this nature that are very impressive, then I think your point of saying it's not that impressive because there's other stuff that did the same. I think there's a point in that. But so far as I know,
there's one. I think it's one of the Mayan temples that has there's one time a year or maybe 2 times a year where the sun lines up just right and it makes it look like this snake. The shadows coming down. It's extremely elaborate. And to me that was more impressive than the pyramids.
Oh, fair enough. For me, the pyramids are definitely more impressive. But yeah, no, interesting angle. But the central point being, to bring it back, is that you can see why somebody can jump to the conclusion of something else was going on there. I can see it anyway, but it's not true, and there's not evidence for it. And having that conversation, when somebody's got a mindset where they're seeing those patterns, I think the best approach to take is to have a sensitivity for their state of mind, which I'm sure you'd agree with.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree with it. I would also say, if you're at a point where, or if one of our listeners is at a point where they're thinking why is it that people, don't think that the pyramids were made by aliens? Why is it that the scientific community isn't jumping all over that and, eating it up? Well, there's probably good reasons. And just because you don't know what those reasons are doesn't mean that they don't exist. It could, one, be a giant grand conspiracy by reptilian overlords trying to, pull the wool over your eyes. But that requires a lot of assumptions. And I think eventually, you have to, one, dig deeper, find out what evidence exists. Does it make sense? Does it actually, answer the stuff better than making a bunch of assumptions that we don't have evidence for? And when you put those two theories side by side, which one requires more assumptions? Eventually, you have to fall back on Occam's razor. If you have two competing ideas and one requires that you throw out everything that we know about the world and how it works, and you have to make all these massive assumptions about conspiracy theories and aliens that we've never witnessed and all this other stuff that seems to make no sense. And then one of them actually elegantly and, fairly perfectly represents the world as we know it and explains it just fine on its own. You have to decide, are these equal hypotheses about the world? And the answer is no.
That's a great point. And it again makes me want to say about when a lot of people, when they're exposed to certain ideas, are presented a straw man of the positions against them. So just spending that time to look up what the people who are advocating certain things are actually saying will make those facts more understandable. I have, before wrapping up, which we can do soon, I do have one more bit of evidence that I found really compelling, but I only found it earlier on, and you guys can tell me if it's as compelling or whether or not I'm just seeing it as that because it's new to me. I think it's brilliant. So shadow clocks, they've existed for ages, and
like
basically yeah, exactly, yeah. That would be the better term for it. If you stick a stick in the ground, then it will produce a shadow, and the shadow moves according to the sun's trajectory. Well, some smart-ass Greeks reasoned that if the world was flat, then two sticks in two different locations would produce the same shadow, perhaps not as much, but the angle would be the same, etc. But they don't. And that leads us into time zones, etc. But I find that to be a really strong bit of evidence that fits the spherical Earth model, but does not fit most opposing models, I should say.
Yeah. I think this is something that I definitely kind of like would use as evidence, but I can also see flat earthers trying to use the whole like sun rotating above us to try and explain it away.
Yeah, I don't find it compelling at all if that's, because they can explain it using the alternate theory.
Yeah, so that
because if the sun is above us and it's spinning around, the Earth, it could also cast shadows differently depending on where it is.
Like, I don't think they could come up with, like, an actual model where you'd get the same readings that we get now. Like, I don't think they could actually come up with a model, but if you're just a random person who's like, oh, yeah, like, the sun does this and that could explain it. Like, I think they could try and explain it away, but I don't think they could get the actual data to oppose it. Does that make sense?
What I find in a way more compelling is that if you had a giant disk and the Earth is a giant disk, and if gravity works exactly the same way that it does now, where basically, if you have a giant sphere, it's every single point is kind of equidistant from the sphere. Obviously it's not on our Earth because, it bulges in the middle, but if everything is pulling towards the center of mass, then if instead of the Earth being spherical, the Earth is a disc shape, everything would still pull towards the center of mass. And so as you get further and further away from the center, objects would, like if you throw a baseball, it would curve backwards. Or if you're climbing towards the side, gravity would be stronger and stronger and stronger towards the middle. Like everything that we know about gravity would function differently than the world that we observe it in. Now, some people say, oh, well, the Earth it's accelerating upwards. Okay, so where is, obviously, acceleration feels similar to gravity because, if you have something below you that's pushing up on you, then everything else is, seems like it's being pulled down. Well, if that's the case, what's the source of this acceleration? What is under the Earth that is constantly pushing it up at 1G? What is causing this? And is it an infinite source of energy? How come we haven't started slowing down by now? How come we haven't reached the speed of light by now? Are we, where is this coming from? For the Earth to be this massive and yet it's accelerating at this insane rate upwards, it's like everything that we know, they have to come up with completely outlandish theories that have no evidence. Like, where's their evidence for that? Like, yeah, you can pull something like that out of your butt, but if you can't put forth any evidence for it, then you're back to square one. Sometimes they'll say, oh, well, gravity is, it's merely, I think like David Avocado Wolf called gravity a toxin. And I was like, what does that even mean? Like, he's like, gravity's not a force. It's not holding you down. And you can be filled with earth energy and you can float up into space. And, and I see that and I'm like, where are you getting this stuff? Like, what is your evidence for this? Do you have people who are levitating off the Earth? Do you have people who are able to demonstrate this amazing skill that aren't some type of magician with smoke and mirrors and, ropes and things like that? I'm like, if they're going to put forth these alternate theories, they have to account for everything else.
Yeah, that is the nail in the coffin, and the most important thing I think that we've said. Exactly what you just said. If they come up with an answer that accounts for a certain fact or a certain line of evidence, it must also account for all of the other observations, and that's where it falls apart. Yeah. So, yeah, that's the takeaway of the day.
Can I add one more kind of piece of evidence that,
of course,
oftentimes you were saying that they'll put forth straw men of certain arguments in order to knock them down. I've seen this there was like a video that came out. It was like 5 minutes or a 5-minute proof of like a bunch of different reasons for the flat earth that came out a little while back. And one of the things that he was talking about was he's like, NASA admits to photoshopping the earth.
Yes.
And then he showed that he's like, here's these pictures that we have of the whole earth, but NASA admits that they're composites.
Yeah, like, there's a NASA guy that says, they're fake, but they have to be. Yeah. And then he goes on to explain why.
But here's the thing, they're not. He says that they're photoshopped. He doesn't say that they're fake.
Oh yeah,
there's a big difference because, for example, if I took a panorama shot, it's a bunch of pictures stitched together. Mm-hmm. It's your phones or your camera software stitching several photos together. If you take a particular image and you look and the white balance is off or the hue is off or the saturation or the contrast or whatever, and you go into Photoshop and you fix that, you're actually making it a closer representation of reality. If you take a picture of the Earth, just like you have, you might have a half moon or a full moon, there's various phases of the moon depending on the time of the month that it is. If you're looking at the Earth from outer space, you might have a half Earth. Mm. You might have, the depending on where the sun is in position to you and where the moon is, you might not be able to see the entire Earth. Plus, if you're up close and it's, a high def picture of the Earth and you're getting a detailed picture, you might not be able to take a picture of the entire Earth. You have to be really far away because the Earth is really freaking big. And so it's not dishonest for them to admit to, if we want to have a really quality HD picture of the Earth, that we're actually taking tons of pictures of it and making composites. But that's not to say that we don't have pictures of the entire Earth. We have like Apollo coming over and seeing an Earth rise, on the moon, watching the Earth rise above the moon's horizon and taking pictures of that. We have, they'll say, oh, we only have a couple pictures by NASA. No, we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pictures, and they're not just by NASA. We have pictures that have been taken by, Japanese satellites and by, the European Space Agency has taken photos. There's independent agencies that there's, it's not just NASA, it's not just the government. You have Blue Origin by Amazon. You have SpaceX by Elon Musk. You have Richard Branson has Virgin Galactic. There's all these companies that are emerging that are getting into the kind of the industrial space race or the business side of the space race. And so it's like, yeah, we might have pictures that are composites. That doesn't make them fake.
No, that's a great leap that shouldn't be done.
I think people just hear the word.
I Photoshop.
Yeah, people hear the word Photoshop and they just take it completely out of context. They're like, oh, well, it must be fake. It must be wrong.
Yeah.
It's like if
I just use that word.
Yeah, it's like
I'm probably gonna take I do take the videos of this podcast and I'll adjust the levels on them. Now, because I edit that video, does that mean that I'm not sitting in this room and that I'm not having this conversation?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
We should cue the X-Files theme song again.
No, I want to just add one more note on that. When somebody says that the photos from NASA, etc., are fake, a lot of responses they get from people which don't think they're fake, who aren't really paying attention to the language that's being used, etc., kind of like what I just did, to be fair, will say, no, it's not fake. Well, the conspiracy theorist knows that they are, and they are. And some of it's sloppy. Some of it, they've got a cloud, and they've duplicated the cloud. And as someone that's a graphic designer, I can see it. It's really obvious. So they win that argument, and it gives the illusion that the conspiracy is true because they won that small point there. And if you couple that with not an understanding from somebody who believes in a sphere Earth, then it just strengthens that conviction, and that's a big problem.
But we have live footage of the International Space Station flying around the world.
Yeah.
And NASA puts this out regularly.
Yeah.
Where they have live feeds, and you can see live weather patterns in specific regions. And you can see what time of day and what time of night it is. And, you know, if it takes Hollywood a massive multi-million-dollar budget and, you know, months, sometimes years, and entire, you know, CGI crews to make movies that look that good, and yet NASA, you know, you can go in, you can look at who all have they hired, you know, what are their experience, you know, these are scientists, these are engineers, these are not graphic designers and editors. No. And you can go and you can meet them, and you can go to their place of work, and you can see what they're doing and what they're working on. You can see NASA's budget, and they're putting this stuff out like daily or weekly, or, you know, like they're not able to, you know, they don't have the time frame to be able to fake all of this at that level.
No, that is the nail in the coffin. That really is it. You can see it.
You can go down to Houston. I used to live a couple hours away from Houston. You can drive down and watch them launch spacecraft, you know, into space. And you can watch the live video feed of it as it's taking place. As you're watching this spacecraft, you can watch it launch into space. And when it goes wrong, you know, like I think it was it Columbia that blew up? You can watch that happen live.
Yeah.
And it's absurd for me to think that these live feeds are that they're all being faked.
And
they'll say, "Oh, you can see bubbles in space." Well, they're dust particles. They're not bubbles. They're like, "Oh, you can't see stars." Like when the astronauts are up in space, it's like, "Well, where are all the stars?" It's daytime. You can see the sun. You can't see stars in the daytime here on Earth.
Yeah.
You know, it's just because you don't understand how something works, just because you're ignorant about it, doesn't mean that just because it goes against your common sense, that there's not an actual, you know, explanation for it that is reality.
And that's the lesson that's not learned, right? So if I have before used arguments from ignorance or personal incredulity fallacies where I've said, I don't understand this, so this can't be the case. As soon as somebody said, well, here is the reason you're not understanding it, I didn't make that mistake again because I was embarrassed. Well, that doesn't seem to happen in many cases. They just go, oh, well, what about this? And it's like, this isn't how you play the game. This is, if you're playing chess, this is knocking the pieces over, shitting on the board, and clucking around like you've won. It really is that meme going on at that point.
Well, and it kind of comes down to, like, what would it take to change their mind? And if they say that there's one piece of evidence that all we need is, you know, live video footage of the Earth, you know, like, again, I'm bringing up David Avocado Wolf because I did like a 17-minute takedown of that guy.
Which is brilliant, by the way. Really good.
Thank you. One of the things I didn't have in that video was he said, you know, why won't they just show us, like, you know, live footage of the Earth? This was a few years ago. And it's like, now they have live footage all the time.
Yeah.
And yet he's still a flat earther.
Yeah, and from multiple sources.
As far as I know, I could be wrong on that. But
multiple sources.
Yeah.
Getting multiple sources from people with different agendas, etc. Getting the Earth, getting captions of the Earth, being literally seeing the curve, it's very obvious. That really is, it's game over at that point. That's the equivalent.
They'll say it's a fisheye lens.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, it's not. You can compare. In fact, there's people who have sent objects like shoes and teddy bears and things up into space on like giant weather balloons that get higher than, you know, planes and stuff.
Yeah, but Thomas, it's always fish eyes. Come on.
But they'll show the object like a teddy bear or a shoe or something. They'll show it to so you can tell it's not a fisheye lens. They'll have it out in front of the camera so you can see that nothing else is warped, nothing else is distorted. And they'll have, you know, feeds of this going up into space. And these are independent tests and independent experiments, you know, and goes up into space and they can see the curvature of the Earth. And it, you know, is exactly what we would expect to see.
Yeah.
I get worked up about this because I'm like, I think that where all of this comes from is we have a broken education system that was made for an industrial era where we just shove information into kids' brains, but we don't teach them how to think. We don't teach them how to, use the scientific method to actually come to an understanding about, like, how did we get here? How did we learn this? How did we figure this out?
Yeah.
Instead, it's just like, this is what we know. And so then when they hear that, oh, some authority figure is lying to them, then they're like, everything I know about the world is wrong. It's like, no, like, there's a reason that we believe certain things and that other things we're skeptical about.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, not all conspiracy theories are equal. Not all of them are insane. But for me...
Some are right.
Yeah. For me, it's kind of like a crime. You need, like, a motive, a means, and an opportunity, and evidence for all of that. And when you take things like Flat Earth and... like creationism and 9/11 and stuff like that, you don't get answers for all of those things, and I think some people ignore that. They just kind of pick and choose, and they're like, oh, well, this one piece fits with my theory, so therefore we have everything. But it's like with Flat Earth, it's like we don't really have a motive, and we don't have any proof of a motive. Like, NASA alone might have the means to kind of like try and fake it, but then taking into account like every space like agency, would you call it, like everyone in the world, like it's just it's too much.
Well, sometimes they'll say that it's demonic forces and it's Satan that's trying to, he's working through the world and he's trying to confuse everyone.
I can believe that.
And I'm like, okay, but what about all of the Christians who believe all of this stuff? What about all the people who go to church on a regular basis and who are, on fire for Jesus, and yet they still run the experiments and they run the tests and they're like, yeah, the earth is still round.
Yeah.
Or what about all of the, like the reason that always kind of strikes me as disingenuous is if you've ever actually sat down with any of the scientists who are testing this stuff, or any of the astronauts or any of the engineers, regardless of their religious beliefs, almost always, like the ones that are actually putting forth these theories that work and testing them and going through the proper avenues to get it peer reviewed and to get it submitted to, a reputable journal, if you ask them why or what it would take to change their mind, and it doesn't matter what their religious beliefs are. If they're doing the science right, you ask them what will change their mind. And if they're an atheist, a Christian, a Muslim, it doesn't matter. They'll tell you it just takes, one piece of evidence would cause me to look at it differently. It just, they're open, they're sincere, they're honest about this. And yet you ask someone who's, a conspiracy theorist and you say, well, what would it take to change your mind? And oftentimes you get like the Ken Ham Bill Nye debate where Ken Ham says, nothing's going to convince me that the Bible isn't, the perfect literal word of God, and that young earth creationism is a fact. Or you have people like David Avocado Wolf that's like, I just need to see a live video feed. And then you show them that and they don't believe it. Or you show them something else and they don't believe it. You show them something else and they don't believe it.
Well, they normally put it into a place where it's infallible. So that's what we have with a lot of religion and the Big Bang. They've moved the point. Mm-hmm. They say, I'll stop believing this nonsense once you prove that how the universe became what it became. And that goalpost will be moved again as that's discovered, if it's discovered. And that's the best place for somebody who is a conspiracist to put the level, because no one can ever...
Or they cherry pick. They cherry pick. So like a young earth creationist oftentimes will point to, scientists discovered, in just this last century that, that the earth had a beginning and that it all came from, they call it a Big Bang. And that's evidence that, God created the heavens and the earth. It's like, okay, well, yeah, scientists discovered that the earth, all of the galaxies that are moving outwards, that they came from, that they used to all be, kind of collected in a particular central point and that they're accelerating away from each other. Well, sure, but they also discovered that happened, 13.8 billion years ago. They completely disregard that fact.
Yep, exactly.
When they're putting forth their, the earth, the universe had a beginning.
Yeah.
Okay, well, how long ago do scientists think that happened?
Yeah.
That you can't cherry pick the evidence. You can't cherry pick the data.
But they can. Like, we live in the world of Christian cafeteria Christianity, and that's what happens with basically with all religions and all religious people, in my opinion. I don't mean to offend anyone that's religious, but that is how I see it. It's picking and choosing certain things. So if we take, for example, the people that accept evolution, that are Christian, brilliant, that's awesome. But what's implicit in that, the fact that you also have to take on board, is that means that a God that you believe is loving created a system and thought the best way to get organisms to a position that he or she or it's happy with or whatnot was through the process of natural selection. And natural selection is brutal. Only a fucking maniac, an absolute arse, would create a system like that. It's not compatible with attributes that Christians give to that God. It's not compatible. It's just, to me, it's bizarre, but that is
where like most mutations result in some sort of monstrosity rather than
it's not just that. It's if you want
engineered perfection, and it dies off.
Yeah. Well, if you want a better eyesight in an organism, what has to happen is most of those organisms, or say in a species, you want that species to have a better eyesight, most of them have to be picked off before they can reproduce in order for the subsequent population to have a slightly better eyesight. That's how natural selection works. That's how it picks traits. That's horrific. That's
the ones
horrible.
that have better eyesight, they've gone through some type of beneficial mutation, but most mutations aren't beneficial.
No, they're not.
You know,
that's another thing on top, and also the mutations are very small.
So a lot of the ones that are having negative mutations are going through some horrific kind of suffering and dying, and you see that with kids that are born who have, you know, some horrible malformation that causes extreme suffering. That, you know, for every kid that has, you know, a positive mutation that, you know, causes them to have like thicker bone density to be able to like withstand any kind of, you know, traumatic impacts. For every kid like that, there's like 100 that have these horrific mutations that cause all kinds of suffering. That's not evidence of any kind of, you know, loving behavior.
No, I mean, and of course we're tapping into perhaps irrelevant areas where we're looking at like the problem of evil, and we're looking at other areas there, which are definitely topics I think that we should go on to. But just in case anyone, well, if you're religious, I'm sure I've offended you many a time.
Well, and I think like our purpose with this show, I know that like on our personal channels we kind of go after religion more and stuff. Like that's not our purpose with the Here and How podcast so much as to like, we want people to really like think about this stuff.
Yeah.
And we want to cover big ideas. We want people to be curious and then to go out and make the world better. And if you're one of our listeners and you know, you happen to be religious and stuff, like we're not here to bash you or to insult you. Like that's not our goal. You know, we just want you to think about this stuff and to think about it critically.
And I think what it is as well is that, as we very much got across in the first episode, we are science enthusiasts. We see the value of it, and we really think it's one of the most important things, maybe even the most important thing to humanity. And the number one thing that erodes it is religion. If you just look at history, it's religion. It's that way of thinking that erodes science and buries it in many cases, as was the case with the ancient Greeks, as was the case with the golden age of Islam. It's a battle that's always going to happen in some form. But yeah, it's a good point that you raised there. So with all of that covered, is there any proofs you want to offer that the Earth's flat? No, but
I will say Steve, you were worried that this episode would be too short.
Yeah. Well, we're all good. We're all good. I think
you weren't prepared for my rants.
I think they were very good. So, and hopefully those that listening will think the same.
I have a question to end on. It's not necessarily flat Earth related, but are there any conspiracy theories that you two think are true?
As in their conspiracy theories now, or
Neil deGrasse Tyson is secretly white. Kidding.
Let me just think of. So, do you mean a conspiracy that right now people don't think it's the case, but it is the case? Or do you just mean like ones? Do I recognise that there have been some conspiracies that turned out to be true?
No. So like ones that now are still just conspiracy theories, but that you actually think could be true.
have they proven that Hillary Clinton had a lot more to do at the foundational level with Bernie Sanders being demolished?
I don't know.
Because I can see that
believe
being
that,
true.
yeah.
And it wouldn't surprise me if it turns out to be true. So stuff like that. But, you know...
I can see Trump being in collusion with the Russians. But it's not like there isn't a massive amount of evidence for that one.
Yeah. No, so yeah, it's... You notice, though, that those conspiracies don't require you to rewrite everything that everybody knows.
Well, and also, I feel like our two listeners are both going to unsubscribe because one of them is a Hillary fan and one is a Trump fan.
Oh, yeah, because I mentioned Hillary in a negative light, I am automatically a Trump supporter. I've watched enough American politics to know that's how that works, apparently. So...
Well, and vice versa for me.
Yeah, exactly.
I have a non-political conspiracy theory that I kind of believe that. Okay, you might think I'm silly. I saw it on the H3 podcast, and Shane Dawson brought it up, and apparently it's that a lot of mattress stores in America are like fronts for money laundering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I could buy that.
Like, it started because there was, like, this random city that had 3 mattress stores on the same street, all the same brand, and he was, like, driving past them, and he's like, mattress store, literally within, like, a stone's throw of each other, and they were, like, always empty, like, never any customers in, and it just makes sense that they'd be, like, using it for money laundering, because whoever buys anything from a mattress store, but they're expensive purchases, and you could, like, put a lot of money through that way, even if you just had, like, a handful of customers a day, or customers a day. And I think that one might be a real one. But I'm getting too into this now. Also, the Earth is flat.
I'd have to have evidence. I thought it was supposed to be Italian restaurants that were money laundering places.
I mean, the point being is that people do money launder.
Yeah.
So, you know, and it is always a conspiracy because it's people conspiring.
Yeah.
So
I think the important difference to make is the difference between a conspiracy and a grand conspiracy.
Yeah. I think that's the case.
Because conspiracies happen all the time. You know, people conspire together to pull off something or other. Yeah, I mean, there's conspiracy to commit murder. There's conspiracy to, you know, commit fraud or any, you know, other crime.
Conspiracy to kick you off the podcast.
The difference with a grand conspiracy is that, like, a grand conspiracy is like at all levels of government and everyone is covering it up and all these people are in on it and you have to suspend all your disbelief and rewrite what you think about reality in order for it to work.
So, like the one that all English politicians are aliens in people costumes and they're going to try and take over the world.
Wait, so that's why, Steve, before we started recording, you said that you took a DNA test and found out that you had royal blood.
I do have royal blood.
Is that your way of telling us that you're a reptilian?
I guess that's conclusive proof. Just for anyone listening, I took a DNA test and 2 results particularly came back that are really interesting. The first is that I'm more than 2, but I'm 100% European, which is rare, 100%. And my ancestors got to Britain 50,000 years ago, which is a long time. And
you're only 45% human.
Yeah, I'm only 45% human, and I've been living I personally have been alive about 400 years. No, but the best one is that they found the blood, a blood-stained bit of cloth in the grave of a king. I can't remember the king, King Louis something. But when they tested his blood, I'm related to him. So
what if it was like just the blood of like a peasant who dug the grave? And
totally possible.
You're actually just the ancestor of a peasant grave digger.
I will say a lot of those DNA testing kits and stuff. I was talking to, I think it was a criminologist who basically does this stuff at like what was she? She basically specialized in DNA analysis.
That's like forensics.
And she's like, yeah, all of those you know, send in your DNA samples and stuff, like it's so easy for them to get contaminants and to be inaccurate and to have flaws and stuff.
I've seen people that do it through multiple, and then you know that you're getting the real deal, because if you do it, it's a bit like science in general. When you have multiple sources telling you the same thing, that's when you can start to conclude, great, that is the case. And that's the same with the flat Earth. When you have multiple sources, different agendas, different people giving you the same facts and the same evidence, that's how we begin to know anything.
Yeah.
Good way to tie that back.
I will say you asked me a second ago if there's any conspiracies that I believe in. I'd say probably planned obsolescence.
What is that?
Would be one of them. Planned obsolescence, and that's basically where a lot of manufacturing companies over the years have oftentimes, like, their products are intentionally made to kind of fail or to become obsolete after a few years.
iPhone.
Yeah.
So like one example of that would be
Tights.
like light bulbs.
Oh, yeah.
Back 100 years ago, like the lifespan of a light bulb was longer. And I don't know, I've never ran any kind of tests on this. Maybe there's a reason why they've changed them. And I know that now LED bulbs last much, much longer. So this kind of throws a wrench in my entire theory, and I'm probably full of shit.
No, there are cases of it, for sure. There's been cases where they found it out. And the thing is, the motive's there. They make more money.
Yeah.
The motive's absolutely there. It's really clear. There's evidence for it as well. Yeah. And that's the key.
I watched a video on this literally like 2 days ago, and a big one is like women's tights or like stockings. Before they were really difficult to rip, and now they rip so easily with anything, and it's so you have to keep going back and buying more.
Yeah. What did you say the word was for it? I didn't know that.
Planned obsolescence.
Of course,
like being obsolete. Cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the companies plan on certain products, rather than improving the quality, they kind of plan for it to either expire or become old. And part of it with technology is, like, technology is a rapidly moving game, and everyone wants to keep up with the Joneses, but at the same time, like, Moore's law is making, computers faster and faster, and processing chips are getting, faster. So it, I can understand how that is not necessarily intentional, but there are things that, they might not add all of the latest and greatest technology to the next edition of the iPhone because they want to save it for, the edition after that, or to, kind of spread out these things to keep people buying.
They did that with the iPads, didn't they? Like they didn't put the camera on one of them so they could like upgrade it later or something like that, I think.
Well, there was actually, I think it was one of the iPod Touches where it had all of the capabilities to record video. Yeah. But they intentionally made, I think it was the firmware for it, to where it wouldn't support it, and you had to like jailbreak it or something in order to have that functionality.
It's crazy.
Because they were planning to release that on the next one. And I know like some of it's intentional, some of it's not, some of it, like, there's different reasons, but I definitely think that, planned obsolescence is, I guess you could kind of call it a conspiracy.
I think it all comes down to the extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And when you make a claim such as companies are making their items or their products so that they break, that's not an extraordinary claim compared to the Earth is flat and all of the evidence and all people are in on it, essentially, on the top, and have been on it for generations. It's just it just becomes nonsense. It becomes impossible, essentially, on that level. So that's the difference there. So conspiracies happen, of course they do. People conspire. People are people. It's straight up. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and they have to be able to sufficiently deal with the facts that we do know.
I think
and that which is exerted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence.
Exactly. Finish with the Hitchens razor.
I think when it comes to the flat Earth, there's so much evidence for a sphere Earth that for me to believe in a flat Earth, I would literally need to see a picture of it and see what's underneath,
Just watch one of them is going to Photoshop one and send it to you and be like, see, you're just as close-minded as...
Exactly. I mean, even seeing a flat Earth, I wouldn't conclude that it's flat at this point because there's so much evidence in other areas. And I know that I can... My vision didn't evolve so that I can see the world for how it is. It evolved so I can survive, which means that I see the patterns and things that aren't there.
That's a very good point.
Very easy to fool me. Just hold up a bit of paper with a certain combination of colors and shapes, and I will tell you it's moving unless I know better, because that's how easy it's done. But in the interest of time, I'm going to wrap up and let our viewers our lovely, should we say 3 viewers or 1 viewer left? Because we've probably got rid of the Trump supporter and the Hillary Clinton supporter with previous comments.
I'm gonna go with 2.
We have a Bernie. We have a Bernie Sanders fan that just subscribed, and next week we'll be joined with someone who is a Gary Johnson supporter.
Okay, this is be worth it. If you're watching this on YouTube and you've watched it all the way to the end, just comment the word cheese, just so I know that someone got to the end.
So I guess we're ready to wrap up, but tune in next week where I will be presenting an unknown topic. We haven't recorded it, and I haven't settled on one yet.
We're so organized.
We're flying by the seat of our pants. Maybe I'll surprise both of you guys.
Yeah, bring it out. That's going to be good. Well, awesome. On that note, take care all, and thank you for tuning in and listening or watching.
This has been an absolute blast, and now we want you to join in the conversation over on the Here and How Facebook and Twitter pages, or follow us on Pinterest and Instagram if you just want some of the dankest of sciencey memes. If you like one of our particular styles, check out each of our YouTube channels: Rachel Oates, Rationality Rules by Stephen Woodford, and Holy Kool-Aid by me, Thomas Westbrook. To find all of our episodes, show notes, contact information, and more, warp on over to our home base, thehereandhow.com. If you enjoyed this episode and want us to succeed in spreading the love of science, you can help us out by giving us a 5-star review on iTunes or Stitcher. And to all our friends and family listening, thank you for spending this episode with us. We'll be back to explore another exciting big idea next week. Now go create something magnificent.